I am Jinesh Warrior. I'm the technology evangelist at Amazon Web Services, working since 2006. I love my job. I totally love the fact because um, the variety and the different types of use cases truly amazes me every single day. Like I talk to several customers all the time, travel around the world, talking about how they're using the services, and it excites me every single day regarding how customers are taking advantage of the cloud, as well as how cloud is really changing the way how we do business. One of the recent passionate subjects that I had was around total cost of ownership. And I purposely named this one as total cost of non-ownership because there is no such thing like ownership in the cloud. Or I would say you have complete ownership, but you don't really have to own the infrastructure in the first place. So what I have done is I'm going to walk through how you should be thinking about TCO. And I have talked to several analysts, several customers, understanding how they calculate that TCO, and then try to find out patterns and best practices from that, as well as typical mistakes customers make when they are trying to do TCO analysis, especially when it comes to on-premise server, as well as running it in the cloud. How many people have done TCO analysis? Okay, few. So we'd love to know more about these things that I talked about in a few minutes. So the one thing which I'm truly passionate about the cloud is because of this one thing on the slide. Now, pay as you go. You only pay for what you use. You have an ability to turn off your resources when you don't need it. And elasticity is the fundamental property of the cloud that drives most of your economic benefits. And the fact that you can turn off your resources and stop paying for them, it makes it even further innovative ways to actually save in the cloud. So with that thought, when you're comparing TCO, one of the most important aspects around this and the typical mistakes customers make is around apples to apples comparison. Right, trying to make sure, and it's confusing. That's no doubt, because in one side of the fence you have on-premise infrastructure where you are purchasing. There is one-time costs involved. Then there is a part of it which is monthly costs as well. And then there are on-premise. In the on-premise setup, there are certain costs that you pay around powering, cooling, hardware administration, and on the colo administration, where you are essentially outsourced that powering, cooling aspects to the cloud, to the colo provider itself. And then how can you compare that part to the infrastructure as a service, where you are not paying for powering, cooling, and other areas? And one of the most interesting, and I would say funny, a story around this was I was asking to one of our customers that how much are you really paying for powering and cooling? He said, I don't pay anything. It's my IT department. So that's the fundamental thing which I see that you have to factor in all the cost involved when you are doing your total true cost of ownership analysis. And in order to calculate, there are these 5 things I would like you to take home when you are analyzing and kind of doing this analysis in your company. The first thing that comes to me is, start with a use case, with an application. Instead of really assigning, buying 5 racks of servers with powering the network switches and management switches, and then making sure you have the right colo provider or a server provider, and doing their cost analysis, pick an application and start from that application. This will make it extremely easy. Instead of buying racks versus, the discussion will turn into understanding and deploying an application. And your analysis will come out it'll be much more easier to think about TCO. And then second thing is that you have to understand is the fact that you have to understand usage patterns of that application. So if you don't have an application today, and if you don't have an application that you know that you would like to move, I would suggest this strategy to pick the right low-hanging fruit in order to do the TCO analysis. So first thing that what customers and enterprises are doing today, if they have, let's say, several hundred IT assets in their application, IT in their enterprise, they want to understand which applications to move or which applications to pick as a low-hanging fruit. They list all their IT assets and understand their upward and downward dependencies and come do a whiteboard chart analysis that will classify your applications based on different categories and understand which applications can be moved to the cloud today. And you will realize that as soon as you move the first set of applications, you would want to move other applications because the benefits that the cloud provides is tremendous in this area. So you identify and pick the lower hanging fruits by listing your IT assets and pick that application for doing the TCO analysis that you want. This is the first recommendation. And the second one around this is that you are stack ranking your IT assets based on your basic requirements, like search for underutilized IT assets, making sure that your applications have immediate business need to scale. These are simple applications, self-contained applications that can be moved, right? So that's the first recommendation, and understanding the usage pattern of that particular application. Sometimes you might not know what usage pattern, like the Washington Post social reader application that does not have any historical analysis, or a new experiment that you're running does not have any data that you can go against and find out that this is the application I'm going to launch. So in that case, this is a third pattern, which is the uncertain, unpredictable usage pattern. I'm going to talk about all these three today when you actually do your TCO analysis. Unfortunately, my power customer, CIO of United States Tennis Association, could not make it here today because he is sick. But he has an amazing energy to speak about how he has actually saved 75% in the OPEX cost, 20% in the CapEx cost, and the most important thing that he thinks it's important in the cloud is that he changes himself from a cable guy to a business decision maker, where he can sit next to the CEO and make real business decisions instead of worrying about cables and operating systems and so forth. So I apologize, but I'll make sure that the slides from Larry are available to you for viewing. So the first thing was, now start with the use case. The second thing, the people typically make mistakes, is they don't take all the costs into consideration. And that's when comes apples to oranges comparison, right? They typically forget some of the main aspects when they are doing analysis. So Gartner publishes this way of connecting true cost of ownership, where they have hardware, software, connectivity, disaster recovery, facilities, and personnel costs. However, I will recommend you, this is one way to do your TCO. The one that has worked for majority of our customers is sort of really creating a table where you identify your one-time costs, and you identify your on monthly recurring costs, and then identify every single line item, right? You understand in the TCO analysis, you have to factor in server hardware, network hardware, rack switches, rack hardware, management switches, powering, cooling, data center, real estate, colocation spaces, storage, and redundancy. The two items that I typically see that customers or analysts miss in this scenario is the hardware administration cost. There are people involved in racking and stacking servers. When there's a fully managed service that you are doing a cost TCO analysis, there are also database administrators. In the case of if you're doing a DynamoDB analysis, you would want to factor in the database administration costs as well. And the second thing which I see most of the time customers overlook those items is the fact that they don't take into consideration redundancy aspect of the cloud. Amazon S3 stores multiple copies in geographically distributed data centers. And you have, it is designed to have 11 nines of durability. So in order to really do the apples to apples comparison, take that factor into consideration to make sure that you have that built in, understand that the same levels of durability, availability is also measured in. So that's just the second thing which I feel taking all the factors into consideration. The third thing, which is the most important thing in my opinion, is the fact that you take into consideration the updated prices, take into consideration the different pricing models that Amazon offers today, and understand that there is, as you grow, you have an opportunity to, to pay even less. Because there are tier volume discounts as well as a tiered pricing for our variety of different services in this scenario. So one thing that you saw in Werner's keynote, that one of the most important pricing philosophy here is that Amazon continues to invest in lowering our costs down, continues to drive in economies of scale, as well as through automation, really kick in those efficiencies that are in there. So there's continuous price reductions that Amazon believes in passing back to the customer. This is the fundamental to our pricing philosophy. And taking that into consideration, that 19 price cuts have been done in the last 5 years, typically I see customers not taking into consideration these simple updated prices. And one quote that I really like from one of the conversations that I had with one of the enterprise IT folks who was using AWS very heavily, he said that it makes me look so good in front of my CFO that all the efficiency, he thinks that I am doing it versus Amazon itself. So I wanted to just highlight that part also into consideration. This is one of the intangible benefits that you get from using the cloud. And last but not the least, on this data point, I wanted to highlight the fact that as you grow, there are multiple ways you will see that Amazon has factored in that pricing, because there are several large customers running on AWS, and they are also asking for the same questions all the time. So you will, as you grow, because you are paying, because there are tiered pricing, your per gigabyte rate reduces. As you grow and you are purchasing reserved instances, there is volume discounts that you essentially get based on your reserved instance purchases and so forth. So there is 10% volume if you have around $250,000 to $500,000. You have 10% volume discount right away in that same bill. And you can leverage tools like Simple Calculator, which has already factored in all these things for you, so you can take advantage of those things as well. These are very simple things to know, right? Of course, there is no charge for any data transfer that is inbound, so you can bring in all your big data as much as you like without any charge for the inbound data transfer, as well as your data transfer out is tiered, so you can factor in those prices accordingly. So these are the simple 3 things that I feel customers that you could do in order to really make sure that your TCO analysis is correct. Now the 4th one is the one that I will spend maximum time on. It's the fact that you have to leverage reserved pricing. There are multiple different options available today with AWS, and taking into factor these TCO in your TCO analysis is extremely important. So multiple pricing models allows you to optimize costs and for both variable as well as fixed cost or stable workloads. And it is fundamentally important to factor in reserved pricing for your TCO analysis, because TCO analysis is typically over 3-year period or 5-year period, and you want to factor into those into the consideration as well. So let me spend a little bit time on explaining you how you can do reserved instance optimization as well as reserved instance modeling so that you have the maximum savings as well as you can, when you're comparing with on-premise setup as well as in your reserved within the cloud, you have factored in all the different ways. So there are 3 ways you can purchase an EC2 instance. Most of you already know, on-demand EC2 instances by the hour. Reserved instances is where you pay a low upfront one-time fee, and your on-demand rate reduces from 8 cents an hour in the case of a small instance to 3 cents an hour. And your overall 3-year time frame, when you do the calculation, it will be around 48% savings for that small instance over on-demand instances. So when you're running it in an on-demand setup, it is our commitment to you. It's not your commitment to us. You have an ability to terminate your EC2 instance and not pay for the time that you're not running in that EC2 during that month time frame or during that time when you're not using it. However, your low upfront fee is going to make sure that you get that guaranteed capacity when you need it. So that is a great way to make sure that it is a perfect combination for when you are comparing TCO analysis, where you have on-premise setup, you're purchasing server hardware, and you are managing that. So it's a great way to apples comparison when you do reserved instances versus on-premise. And the other one, which I'm not going to spend more time today, is the spot instances, where you have an ability to bid for unused EC2 capacity. So you can further reduce your cost by leveraging some of the spot instance pricing model. And I talked about it in the last session in the technical track about how customers like Vimeo, how customers like University of Melbourne and others leveraging reserved plus on-demand plus spot in their entire equation in a really smart way to make sure that they get maximum savings. So it's a great exercise that cloud computing brings to technical folks of how you can think about business aspects and bring a dramatic impact on your bottom line. So reserved instances provides 3 ways of further, three ways in which you can further reduce your cost. And understanding how, and there are multiple different pricing models as well as multiple different ways you can create your TCO analysis. Right? So it is, reserved instances can be purchased for 1-year term and 3-year term. And reserved instances have 3 types of utilization. That is light utilization, medium utilization, and heavy utilization. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So if you take a simple graph analysis and just plot your price of a reserved instance of a particular availability of region and against the on-demand rate, you will see this setup. What you are seeing here is the blue line, which is the on-demand rate, which is essentially going to be 45 cents an hour and linear in a situation. And when you think about reserved instances, think about as if it's a variable reserved instance and a fixed reserved instance. Fixed reserved instance is essentially your heavy utilization types. Your variable ones are light and medium. So you have an ability to turn them off, and you don't pay for that during the time when you are not using it. Right? So you can see there is a clear break-even point when you are mapping reserved instances with your on-demand instances in this scenario. So in this scenario, for this particular instance type, if you're running it less than 10%, don't think about reserved instances. Essentially, you're running only 1 month out of, or 1.2 months out of the 12-month period. Right? If you know that your instances are going to run more than 10% of the actual time, go ahead and think about reserved instances, because that's going to give you maximum savings. And invest in that so that you get those maximum savings in there. In this scenario, if you're running between 10 to 40% utilization, and you know that your servers are not going to be up all the time, and you can optimize, you can go for that and get up to 56% savings. on that particular model. If you have up to 75% utilization, that means like a database that you're always going to keep it running all the time, always on, you're not going to turn it off. The maximum savings that you can get is through 3-year heavy utilization reserved instance, where you can get up to 71% savings for that particular instance type. So take that into consideration, and let me give you a complete picture of how this whole thing will work in a kind of a scenario. So let's say you are an IT manager, and you have been tasked to do TCO analysis for your 3 types of web application. You are an IT manager reporting to the CIO who has tasked you to do how much it will cost you on an on-premise setup, and how much it will cost you in a different variety of different options for these different scenarios that I'm going to talk about. So the example, just going a little bit technical in this executive track, is that you have a 3-tier web application, you have a web server, you have app servers, and you have a database server. What I'm assuming is that you have a typically the orange are web servers which can auto-scale on demand. Your app servers can also auto-scale on demand. Your databases is running on Amazon RDS. It's multi-AZ replicated, so it has a synchronous replication in another availability zone, so you have higher availability for your database. Your static content is being stored in S3, served by CloudFront. This is a very typical architecture that we see for a web application. And imagine that you have been tasked to see that you are building such an application, and you have different usage patterns for each one of them, right? So the first usage pattern that I would like to discuss is the steady state usage pattern. So in this scenario, you have, think of this as a simple corporate web app website. Your website where you are representing your company, your products, your board of directors, your customers come online and log in, and they get a customized view of what they have purchased. And you have several different product catalogs listed on the website and so forth. In that, you don't really expect massive amounts of traffic or a big spike coming, right? So in this scenario, you see that you have pretty uniform steady state traffic in there. Typically, customers do is they will provision for that capacity. So the red line is their physical servers. And then in this scenario, in order to do the apples-to-apples comparison, I have the green line, which is representing my on-demand or my EC2 instances. And I'm going to compare on-premises, how much it will cost you for an exact same server that you would go off on a vendor website and find out what exactly it's going to cost in a highly conservative fashion. And there is a white paper which we'll be releasing pretty soon, which will detailed talk about all these patterns and where we got the cost from and so forth. In this particular example, the setup looks something like this, where you have on one side an on-premise setup, where you have server hardware, network hardware for the exact EC2 instance type for the web application that I just showed you earlier with the 6 instances in it. You have 2 servers, 2 web servers, 2 app servers, 2 database servers. And you want to measure their TCO analysis for that. So per server cost times 6 is what I have done. In order to do this analysis, what I did was essentially, I went off the website, I found out what would be the cost of 2 racks. I amortized that cost over a month, so you have maximum savings for that particular, you get the complete conservative outlook for on-premise setup in this scenario. So in this aspect, I'm comparing that on-premise setup with different options, right? The first option is 3-year heavy utilization all over. So there are for all the 3 EC2 instances, for this particular steady state instance, I have, you will see that up to 73% savings will be there for that particular usage pattern. However, if you see that if you're running this entire thing on-demand instances, your savings might not be there so much, but you have to understand that for that option 2, you have, there is no upfront commitment. right? So you need to factor in that time value of money into the equation, so you understand that the fact that if option 2, which is all on demand, will give you, you don't have to invest anything upfront. However, you have an ability to do everything on demand and not pay for any infrastructure that is that provision upfront anything. However, my best recommendation, however, to you is the fact that you can do option 3, where you have a mix of both on demand as well as reserved. So you have a balance of both, where you have upfront costs, and then you will have an ability to save much more heavily when you're using on demand. So in the case of a typical steady state scenario, where you will see an on-premise, you'll go and get the servers off from a website, from a vendor, provision them, stack them, factor into consideration hardware administration and other aspects as well. So this is so good so far for a TCO of a steady state web application. What happens when you have a web application when it's a spiky, predictable web application? And this was actually what Larry was going to talk about for his website, United States Tennis Association website, or the other backend services that they have due to that website. Every annual, once a year, they have US Open, where they get this massive spike due to that particular tournament that's going on. They list all the profiles of all the tennis players and live footage for all the matches and so forth. However, they know what that graph is, because they have been doing this almost every single year. So it's highly predictable in nature. What typically customers do in this scenario, in an on-premise setup, they will provision for peak capacity. And when you provision for peak capacity, this is one of the most important events. In this case, USTA's important event was US Open. They cannot afford to have disappointed customers in this scenario. So they have to provision for peak capacity. So in this one, I'm going to do, there is an opportunity to provision for baseline capacity in case of EC2. And then all the other traffic that you have is going to come off from on-demand EC2 instances. So here you are using mix of on-demand as well as for your reserved instances for your baseline capacity, right? So let's see how do the calculations look like in this setup. Here you have an ability to turn them off here, so you're not paying for your resources when you don't need. You're not provisioning for peak capacity as well. So in this scenario, the same server, the same architecture, the same setup. All you're doing here is, in the case of on-premise, you're provisioning for 10 servers, and in the case of on-demand and reserved, you're provisioning for 4 servers, minimum servers you need to run an application, and then everything else is going to come off from an on-demand instance. So in this setup, I have 4 instances, 2 for databases, and 1 for app server, 1 for web server. And here you can see there are 83% savings over on-premises. And I have compared, again, 3 different options. The first option is really about on-demand and reserved. So you have provision for 4, and then everything above that green line that you just saw was coming off from an on-demand setup. The second option is about all on-demand, where there is this option and a flexibility to not pay upfront. And again, you see the savings on that aspect as well, because you are running only for that duration of that time frame. You see the savings coming in. And when you do your TCO analysis, factor in that equation as well. So that's the TCO for spiky web applications. The third one, which is the most interesting of all, where you don't know how much traffic you are going to get out of your website. Right? You're launching a really cool new experiment, new social application on Facebook. You have no clue how much traffic you have, because you don't have any historical analysis or historical data about this application. So how would you predict that? right? And if you are that IT manager that I talked about who have to predict TCO, right, most of the time you will be confused as to where do you draw that line of how many servers you will need in order to meet that demand. So in this scenario, as you can see, I have between 6 to 8 servers. I'm testing it for 3 to 4 months, trying to understand what my traffic is going to be. So what you do, oops, sorry, there is a animation problem. But essentially what you're going to do is something like this. You will see your traffic. You will buy that many servers that will give you the maximum, so it will serve that particular traffic. And then when you see that the traffic is growing, you will want to step up and purchase more servers in an on-demand setup. So you will do a step-up approach in order to meet that demand. In this scenario, you have 8 servers running for a period of 1 year. And then after 1 year, he saw that a lot of traffic is above that limit. I want to purchase 2 more additional servers, and he goes into purchasing more. So this is the setup that he would take in a typical on-premise environment, right? In the case of reserved instances, or in case of in the cloud, you will always, when you do your TCO analysis, you have to understand your baseline capacity, your minimum servers you need to run that application. In this case, 4. 2 for databases, 1 for app, 1 for web. So I'm going to provision baseline capacity through the green line to reserved instances. I'm going to provision all that above in multiple different ways. As I talked about, Amazon provides lots of flexibility in 1 year light, 3 year light, 1 year heavy, 3 year reserved heavy, medium, and so forth. You can pick and choose the ones that you like. In this scenario, because it's a web application, there are different options that exist today. Either you can provision up to that green line for reserved, and then everything else is on demand, or you purchase reserved plus anything between the green line and the red line, which is your capacity. You can also purchase reserved, but in this case, you want to lower your risk and go for 1 year light, which has the lowest upfront cost, but still give you the maximum savings. So for your median traffic, which is between your 4 and 8 lines, you are investing in 1 year light reserved instances. And then anything above that red line essentially would be on-demand rate. So what happens in this scenario is there are different options that you can consider and different ways, and flexibility is in your hands to understand whether you want low upfront cost or whether you want to go on everything all on demand, or you want to go all reserved with that flexibility that you want with 1 year light, 1 year reserved, and 1 year heavy, and so forth. So I have taken 3 approaches here. The first option is taking reserved for baseline, reserved for 1 year lights for my medium, and everything above is on demand. That you can see the savings of 42% overall. And let me come to one more important point later on about the last line. But option 2 is on demand, all reserved, and 1 year light. So I am a very risk-averse person, so I don't want to invest in this scenario. So I would go with 1 year light utilization, where I have low upfront costs, but everything else will be on demand. So that one is the second option. And the third option is giving you 25% savings over on-premises. So you will have an option to understand whether you want to go most cost-effective for a 3-year period, or you want to have a balance of best of both in this scenario. So there are 3 different options that will help you understand. Based on your understanding, you can create a TCO analysis around that. Now, one of the most important things in this aspect is that in the previous scenario, anything above that red line in the on-premise setup is your cost of lost business or cost of disappointed customer. If you have a revenue-generating app, it's actually percentage of revenue that is being lost. If you have a non-revenue-generating app, which is just going to run, and you are dropping all the traffic on the floor above that red line because you cannot provision that much infrastructure in that time frame, you have disappointed customers. And so you need to factor in that conversation. So what I have done in the analysis is factor in how much traffic is above the red line and how much traffic, total traffic that you have when you're running it on-premise. And there was 23% cost of lost business. And if it's a revenue, it will be a direct relationship with that revenue thing. 23% of the total revenue or so forth, whichever is your number to go with. But essentially, the point I'm trying to make is, with an on-premise setup, you don't have an option to either you are scrambling and getting resources from other parts of the department or other departments and trying to make that load, or you are trying to really, you are losing that much that customer. And you need to factor in that also into your TCO analysis. So that was the thing which I really wanted to talk about. From now, if you need to really understand do the right TCO analysis, take into consideration usage patterns, reserved instances, as well as the factor in the cost of lost business or cost of underlining or under provisioning or over provisioning. Have to have that into your TCO analysis. So these are the four things the fourth thing which I wanted to discuss. The last one, which is one of the most important thing to consider when you are considering, but it is extremely difficult to factor into a TCO analysis. But I want to give you an example, and this was again brought up by, in his presentation, Larry. He wanted to talk about this as a more important benefit. It's the intangible cost benefits that you get. And so take a very closer look to what you get as a part of AWS itself. The first one is you get this: AWS offers and delivers premium security spec at non-premium prices. This is fundamental. Now, every single customer, regardless of its size, will get the highest level of security and privacy levels that Amazon has defined. It's the highest common denominator, right? So you have to understand that all these things in audits and other areas, the costs that you have, that you might have in the case of an on-premise setup, you are getting these levels in your compliance as well. The second one is, which is the most important again here, is the reduced time to market, business agility. If you are releasing a particular product 9 months before the scheduled time, you have 9 months of additional revenue. And that also needs to be considered because you don't need to wait for resources, you don't need to buy hardware and so forth. That also has to be understood and taken into consideration. Now, opportunity cost. This is favorite for enterprise customers because they can actually see that as something somewhere that I would have reutilized some of the assets in some other parts of my business. Or I'm leveraging and having my database administrators or my system administrators into doing something more focused to my domain. If it's a United States Tennis Association that has a DBA who was working, they might want to understand the value and kind of understand and solve some of the tennis-related problems for that instead of really worrying about racking and stacking servers. Right? So this is also one of the most important thing, an intangible cost saving, which is very difficult to factor into a numerical value and put a dollar figure to it, but it gives as a most important benefit around. So continuous optimization will result in recurring savings as early as your next month's bill. And this is due to the elasticity itself. If a developer or an architect build a small caching service that is reducing the number of requests to the database server, you will need a lighter database, a lower instance type. That's their cost savings there and there itself. And because they are reducing the request of the server, request to the server, you have those savings reflected in your as early as your next month's bill, right? So it has an immediate ROI on the factors that that is important to consider. And a developer or an architect has an ability to make a dramatic impact on the bottom line. And that's much more powerful, motivating for an architect and a developer when they see this much savings have resulted because they have implemented this one piece in their architecture itself. So when you do your TCO analysis, I highly recommend you that reduce TCO remains one of the fundamental reasons why cloud is being used. However, now, the more important reasons where cloud is being used, or adoption reasons, are reduced time to market, opportunity cost, having an ability to focus on your domain problems instead of worrying about servers and stacking them and racking them and so forth. So with that, these are the 5 things that I would like to talk. I talked about. Feel free to connect with me later on. I would love to talk about all the different ways in which you are doing TCO analysis in your company. And I'm working with a variety of different customers as well, as understanding and helping them how to use reserved instances, how do you optimize further, as well as there are different ways in which you can save. There is Amazon Economics, AWS Economics Center, which has lots of white papers, tools, calculators, which will help you do the analysis. We will be releasing this TCO white paper that I just showed in a couple of days. So please take a look at that as well. And there are a variety of different case studies as well, like how Foursquare in this scenario has a case study around how why they invested in $1 million of reserved instances to do their exploratory analysis. So there is a case study which will dive into that into more details as well. So just to wrap up, AWS pricing philosophy or the pricing structure is pay as you go. Your CapEx, your capital expenditure is converted into operating expenditure. You have an ability to turn off when you don't need it. You pay less, even less, when you use more because of volume discounts and tiered pricing. You pay even less when you reserve and you know usage patterns that you want to invest in. And there are a variety of different models that you can create based on that particular reserved instances, heavy, light, medium, for 1 year and 3-year terms. And last, one is Amazon is continuously driving down costs for customers as our costs reduce due to economies of scale and efficiencies. And one which I have not included in here is Amazon has custom pricing as well. So if you have higher volumes and you need to talk to someone and you need to talk to a sales guy, please feel free to connect with us. And there is custom pricing for even higher volume customers. So there are different ways in which you can leverage in an effective way. So with that, these 5 things, please feel free to get in touch with me later on if you have any questions. My email address is here, and you can feel free to connect with me later on your TCO analysis, as it will make sure that I learn a bit as well as we understand what customers are doing. So I hope it was educational and informational as well. Love to connect with you later during the conference, during the day itself. Thanks a lot.